Hello, everybody. This is Breaking Ish. I am Ovishik, and welcome to my channel. If you're new, please like and subscribe. Today, I'm going to do something a little bit differently. Over the last month or so, I have been going over the January 6th report and informing people about what's been happening with our republic in terms of national security and Donald Trump's seditious conspiracy. What I've done from time to time, I have discussed American society, law and society, American race politics, and history as part of this discussion that I have on my channel. With the recent murder of Tyree Nichols, it is beholden of me to discuss again what I see happening in my country. And I want to offer you a perspective um, that I had in my mind, that I have in my mind of our country. I moved to the United States in 1997, and I moved to Danville, Illinois, which was a very small town in East Central Illinois. Today it is MAGA country. And I grew up in a town that was conservative. I'm of Indian descent, and I moved there with my mother and lived there with my stepfather, who was Indian as well. And while I noticed a huge segregation in society between the rich and the poor, between the um, Caucasians and the non-white, uh, in the cliques in high school, in the stories that you hear from the movies and books that gives you an idea of American culture. And some of it was true, yeah. Some of it was buried, you know. America looked like the shining city on the hill when I first moved there. I remember I flew into O'Hare, and then my stepdad drove us down Michigan Avenue once we left O'Hare, went into Chicago. And for the first time, I remember seeing a city, and this was right after, I think it was right before Thanksgiving. So the Christmas lights were coming up, and I saw the first major sight of an American city I ever saw was Chicago, Michigan Avenue being lit up in all the Christmas lights, and it was one of the most grand and fulfilling and warm feelings, even when it was bitter cold compared to what I had ever experienced while living in India. And then I moved. Then I went to Danville, and obviously Danville, Illinois, which is 2.5 hours south of Chicago, is a very different world. And I didn't know anything about any of those worlds, right? I just knew what the American promise was. You know, there would be plentiful of everything, and there was. There was a. I did not have a want for anything simply because my stepdad and my mom were fairly well off. And in many ways, I was shielded as I was growing up in high school from race politics, with the exception of the time when I went to date a black girl. And I remember my mother having an issue with it. And my mother was Indian, and I didn't understand that. I fought with my mother on it. I dated the girl I wanted to date, and she's a wonderful woman who now has a kid and a family. I I have for a long time, that was my introduction to prejudice in America. My mother having an issue, my South Asian mother having an issue with me dating a black girl. And I'm the kind of person who would, uh, you know, always ask why, no matter what, even if it got me in trouble. And so I took it upon myself to ask my mother over and over and over again, why? Why would you do something like this? It doesn't, it's just wrong. Because to me, independent of what I learned from my family, prejudice on the basis of someone's social status, prejudice on the basis of someone's skin color, to me personally, was abhorrent. It was abhorrent. It was before I knew about American history, it's before I knew about race politics. That separation of being some better than somebody else is not something that ever registered with me. But what I learned from my mother is that it registered with even people who were not part of the supremacist hierarchy in America. The ideology was supremacist on a social level. You know, the girl I was dating was from a lower socioeconomic class. She lived in a different part of the town. Uh, and my mother was concerned about what her associates and her society would say. And I just didn't care about that, you know? And that was the first opening I had to prejudice personally, uh, in America. You know, I experienced class politics and socioeconomic politics a lot when I was growing up in India, so it wasn't unfamiliar to me. It was very disappointing for me that my mom would fall into that um, category. I don't think my mom is prejudiced. I don't believe that my mom is racist, but I believe that my mom fell victim to the environment. And that brings me to my story's culmination, you know, the title of saying from the city, shining city on a hill, to the house on the haunted hill. You know, from afar, this house looked amazing, you know, and it is amazing. It is by all measures amazing. But standing afar, you never got to see who built the house. Standing afar, you never get to understand on whose shoulders our country was built. You never get to see the prejudices that are buried underneath. For that, you have to go live in that house, you know? And I didn't, even after that experience, even after me inherently and personally never having that idea of being better than somebody, I still it didn't register for me that, you know, that this social politics, this race politics was ever going to be something that I would have to personally deal with because I was shielded by the socioeconomic barrier here. And for a long period of time, it's not that I pushed that barrier, I leaned on it. And I went to college. I started as an architecture student at the University of Illinois. I partied most of it, and then I changed majors because architecture wasn't my cup of, you know, vodka. So, and I went to uh, learn history, and you know, I switched majors entirely because I partied myself out of the architecture program, and I'll be honest with you. And I fell into the history program, and I didn't, you know, I was mortified that, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to learn history. I didn't like history in high school. American history was very foreign to me because obviously I had lived my first 12 years in India. So, but when I got into learning about American history in undergrad, it all sort of, I don't know, I drew to it because it was all about inequality and equality. It was all about the social dynamic of an egalitarian society. It was the idea that America battled with on a daily basis. It was the egalitarian facade on the outside, and then all of the ugly uh, history underneath that was buried underneath affirmative action and underneath the history of segregation and under the history of you know, racism and the history of the Civil War. the history of slavery, the history of persecution. And I grew up learning about that. And I learned about race and gender in American history and how the the cancerous, dysmorphic uh, manipulation of the American psyche and particularly American masculinity had been the fulcrum around which the whole psychosocial uh, development of American social psychology grew. And you could see that in people's conversations. You could see that in the cliques that people had. I was part of the interfraternity council. I was in a fraternity when I was in college, but I was in a white fraternity. There was also the black fraternities and the black sororities. There's the white churches and there are the black churches. And a friend of mine in law school, who's from Alabama, who's now a practicing attorney in New York, once told me, and this was back in early 2000s, mid 2000s, that, in my town in Alabama, white people still go to white church and black people still go to black church. And this is, obviously many years after segregation. And you have to understand why that wasn't. Why. And then you learn that the culture of Christianity in white culture in America is very different than the culture of Christianity in black culture in America. While in white culture, historically, Christianity has been used as a tool of exploitation, as a means to bend the laws, as a means to propel prejudice. Faith and Christianity in black churches has been a place of refuge, has been a place of relief, has been a place of collaboration, has been a place of peace. And then I learned, one of my professors in undergrad said, the first thing she ever said in my Race and Gender in America Independent Studies senior year in college was, America was built on the shoulders of black slaves. It still sends chills down my spine to say that. America was built on the shoulders of black slaves. And we have to appreciate that. We have to honor that. Until America as a country honors that, until we understand that, we will never move forward. Today, we live in a society where every day we hear about violence. We hear about gun violence. We hear about gang violence. We hear about political violence. We hear about cops killing, excuse me, innocent people, innocent black people. What a horrible, horrible place that we have come to today. For decades, we covered up the ugliness. For decades, we covered it up. And even today, when we hear about it, we get in a tiff about it. We talk about it for a week or two or three or four. And these mothers who lose their children, they go out and they spend the rest of their lives advocating for peace and advocating for social justice. And the band keeps playing on. Because we as a society still don't appreciate that our country was built on the backs of black slaves. That today we are seeing the remnants of that cruelty transfer from slave owners to law enforcement and to become a culture, the blue wall of silence, a police culture of brutality that has over the last 40 years eroded our Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures and gone out of its way to punish people of color, and particularly the African American community. It has become America's muscle memory. From Rodney King to George Floyd to Tyree Nichols to every single other person in the middle. You have to appreciate that today we get to see this happen on camera because of technology, because of police body cameras, because of brave individuals taking videos of it, even despite police threatening them while they're doing it. But imagine how many of these lynchings did we not witness? We only know stories of them, stories that supremacists and social dividers and ghouls and demons of our past keep burying and placating and running over and finding excuses for. We are paying with the blood of innocents to this day. These lynchings that we witness today, that we are outraged by, they've been happening in America for hundreds of years. The only difference is today we see it. We get to be outraged by it for maybe a couple of days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then we go back. We go back to our conveniences. We go back to complaining about not having them. We go back to being prejudiced. We go back to the minutia without noticing the unraveling that is happening in our country. And people who are hell-bent on dividing our country, whether that be outside foreign agents or assets of these foreign agents in our country, they work every day to divide us. This notion of wokeism, woke politics, let me say this to you one time and let me say this clearly. Woke, the word woke, came into American discussion as part of the American colloquialism that we know as Ebonics. American colloquialism of changing certain words and usages as it would fit in with the African American narrative. That word, woke, was then transferred on to the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd's murder. And it was taken up and moved forward by social activists and by the Democratic Party. In response to that, instead of getting together with Democratic Party to say, yes, we address these issues of social inequality, the Republican Party decided they wanted to go to war on the word woke. They wanted to go to war on the word that was drawn from African American culture to discuss issues of social injustice in our country that pertains to racial inequality. And I want you to take that definition. I want you to look that up. Go to Google, go to Wikipedia, go to different sources of the word woke. Learn about where that word came from. And then I want you to tell me, explain to me how this is not race politics, how this is not the GOP, the Republican Party, declaring war on race politics. And you would think that this would just be a one-off if it weren't for Ron DeSantis barring the study of advanced placement African American studies in Florida. If it wasn't for conservatives, MAGA, attacking critical race theory and the ugly legacies that our country is caked over with, a layer atop layer atop layer atop layer. They want to put another whitewash over it. You know, they want to attack wokeness. They want to attack the new terminology, the new nomenclature of race politics. So they want to attack race politics. When attacking race politics is absolutely and abjectly opposite what every politician should and needs to do at this time. The problem has metastasized and has moved from slave owners and their ways to a bifurcation of a political party going to war on race politics, while the blue wall of silence and generational corruption of law enforcement goes on the attack on people of color, particularly African Americans. This is where we are today. You think slavery is gone? You think equality is the law of the land? You are only looking at it from afar. You are looking at it like I did, sitting thousands of miles away in India, dreaming of Lady Liberty. You have to come to Danville, Illinois, and go to my high school. And then you would know how it was different. Then you'd have to go to learn about the history of our country, that our country was built on the backs of Black slaves, of cruelty, our legacy of inequality. And why do you have to learn about these ugly truths? Because we have to ensure that those things don't repeat itself. We have to ensure that African Americans are not given their reparations by way of cruelty, inequality, and police brutality, by means of a system that tortures and kills Black people on camera, and then after screaming and shouting, after traumatizing families and leaving mothers speechless and breathless, they get money for the liability that of the police department, of the government. It's this horrible, horrible, cancerous way of yielding reparations, don't you think? Like, our society is designed today to attack the African man. Our society, American society, is designed today to make the African American woman work twice as hard and give her half as much. Our society, American society, is built today that takes away the rights of women, the right of women to choose. Our society, our American society today, is prejudiced enough that it goes back on the rights of minorities, of sexual minorities, that jokes and mocks immigrants who come for refuge to our country. I'll tell you that these ugly truths of our country existed 30 years ago when I moved to the United States, but they weren't metastasized to a stage 3 cancer as it is today. It wasn't wide open for everybody to see. It wasn't happening every single day before our eyes. And the ugliness of it is, in my mind, it should open our eyes. It shouldn't, it shouldn't make us afraid. It shouldn't push us back into the shadows of white normativity, simply because there is this overwhelming systemic corruption that grips our society. In fact, this is the time that people who are invested in an egalitarian society must stand up and remember that in the country where there was slavery and cruelty, where even to this day the rights of people are punched and pepper sprayed and tortured to death on camera, that it is also a country that affords equal rights for all. It is also a country where we can fight for it. And we must fight for it. And we must do so peacefully. We must not turn our pain and sorrow into rage and break things and break society. Why? Because America was built on the backs of black slaves. Don't tear the country down that you built. Because the people who enslaved your ancestors and the people who are prejudiced against you and me are pressuring you to, are pushing you, are by means of this massive, massive systemic ill, wrong, this plague. And it falls on us. It falls on us to never allow that. It falls on us to refuse to go back to placating. It refused to just stand quietly while they turn the movement of social justice, of woke politics, into a race war, into trigger words, into dog whistles. And we need to call out people like Kevin McCarthy, who took the speaker's gavel, and one of the first things he did was declare war on race politics. Instead of demanding social justice, he doubled down on the ugly legacy of prejudice in our country. And people like that don't belong in positions of power. And we have to work together. We have to work together to turn out the vote in overwhelming numbers. And it might seem like a repetitive thing, but it is repetitive. All of these things are repetitive. These are all repetitive. And it boils my blood because it's repetitive. It shouldn't be this way. Kids should not be inundated with lies. Kids should not be shielded from the truth. Yes, kids must not be pressured into being something they are not. Schools must be given the latitude to teach. You know, when you go to a school and you are a parent and you register your child, you sign a piece of paper. When you sign that piece of paper, registering your child to that school where your child can come to that school every single day, you are turning over your parental rights to that school for that period of time. And this term is called loco parentis, in the place of the parent. And at that time, when the child is in school, it is the school's responsibility to tend to your child's well-being. If you believe that your schools and schools in general are not public schools, I'm not talking about private schools, public schools are not meeting the measure of protecting your child and your child's well-being, you have the reasonable alternative to remove your child from public education and homeschool them. You also have the option of taking your child to a private school. These are called reasonable alternatives. What you don't have the right to do is go and threaten teachers and tell them what to teach. You don't have the right to control the education board and their methodology. And the government sure as hell does not have the right to do that. The government in a public education system has the right to regulate their education programs at the top level and let it be independent of day-to-day oversight. For a governor to go and tell the education department, which is linked to the federal Department of Education, what it can and cannot teach overreaches into the domain of education. And that is a place that our government doesn't belong. Give children the truth. Let them pick the truth. Not the truth. Let them pick what they choose to learn. Not everybody has to take AP African American Studies. But it is fundamentally wrong for the governor of Florida to tell the Department of Education that you cannot teach AP African American Studies to anybody. Or you cannot teach these things in AP African American Studies to anybody. That's an advanced placement class, for God's sakes. You know, in my school, how many people took advanced placement classes? There was maybe like 20 or 30 of us. 20, no, not even 30. 20, 22 of us. We were all recycling all the advanced placement classes. Like all it was just the 30 of us. My class was a class of nearly 400 people. And there were 30 people or 40 people who would take the various advanced placement classes. I took a handful of advanced placement classes. I didn't take uh, African American history. I took calculus, AP calculus, and AP biology, and you know all the horrible classes. Anyway, but that choice that children have to forwarding their future goals of educating themselves, you stamp that out because it teaches about America's ugly truths. But at the same time, it also teaches about America's promise that, look, we have made it this far. Today, we can sit and talk about it. Today we can be rightfully outraged. Today, the President of the United States can call for peaceful protests. Today, we have the place to come out and peacefully protest. We have the choices. We have the rights. We have fought for them and we have them. And we will fight for them until they are solidified. But now, these people, supremacists, power mongers, want to cut us off at the legs of that education, of that basic education, of having the knowledge whatsoever. And if that is not House on the Haunted Hill, as opposed to Shining City on the Hill, I don't know what you would call it. I watched the videos that came out yesterday. I watched the videos of those police officers murdering Tyree, and I watched the video of David DePape attacking Paul Pelosi. And I listened how from the same channels people were making fun of Paul Pelosi and saying that both the video of Tyree's murder and Mr. Pelosi's attempted murder were staged. And I'm witnessing people politicians and leaders on the right pick up that propaganda and peddle it. And I am doing what I can to call it out. And I'm pleading with every American to call it out. I plead with every American to learn what you can about our ugly past and have this courage to say that we had an ugly past and we have ugly stories to tell even to this day. But we also have the promises that we have worked so hard to achieve. We also have the protections that we worked so hard to achieve. They are eroding today. They are falling back again today. And we must stand up again today and refuse to relent. We must refuse to relent on the rights of women to choose. We must refuse to relent on demanding justice against police brutality. We must refuse to relent on corrupt politicians who are hell-bent on destroying our republic, who have taken our country down the horrific path of political violence with people like Solomon Pena and David DePape and attacks on federal agencies and the insurrection. We must resist these demons of our past because they are in one way or shape demons of our past. They are things that we have dealt with before and we will deal with them again. We just can't lay flat. We just can't look at the easy news. We just can't turn over, to puppies and rainbows every time something bad happens. We can't refuse to share a video. You know, I agree with what a lot of people have said, that don't overshare the video of these violent incidents. But I shared the video of the police brutality attack because Tyree's mother wanted the world to see what they did to her son. These mothers, what they go through, what they have to endure on a day-to-day basis, every day from the day that their children are taken away from them. For the world to see, in front of the world, the horror of that they have to live through. Do not let that be forgotten. Do not let that go into the night that nobody talks about, simply because it is too horrific for us to witness. He succumbed to it. She has to live with it for the rest of her life. So we can't be enraged by it. We can't show it to others to say, look at this. There have been hundreds like this in our history, thousands, countless like this. And we are still dealing with these demons today. So where is that shining city on the hill? I don't see it. I see a haunted house. A house that is beautifully built, that is magnificent, that is full of stories, that is full of grandeur, but it is built on the ugliness of slavery. That is built on the violence and prejudices that power mongers peddle, that supremacists believe is right. And that's just not something that we can allow as Americans. Read your Constitution. Read the legacies of our founding fathers, their ugly truths, and the progress they made. Don't just stop at saying our founding fathers were slave owners. Our founding fathers were slave owners, many of whom understood what they were doing was wrong. I believe that. Otherwise, we would not have the amendments. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a constitution that is an open-ended document, which leaves room for improvement, forever moving towards a more perfect union. Step by step, every day, it's a work in progress. And today we take, yesterday in January, and with every death, with every violent, meaningless loss of life in our country at the hands of other Americans, we have to ask ourselves the questions as to why this continues happening and why people in power will not do anything about it. Gun reform, racial equality, reform in police departments, fundamental restructuring of police departments, training, oversight. Why does this not happen? Mental health services for communities and for the people and for the police forces, for public health officials, for public servants, and for private citizens. Why can't we do that? Why can't we make healthcare and mental health care priorities? Why can't we do civic education that brings together communities and police forces and the government? Why can we not dispel this distrust that police have systemically against the African American community? These are all whys that we must answer, all problems we must solve if we are to move forward. Because we are at a cusp now. And I'll end here. I'll say this. We are at a cusp in our country. We are at a turning point. We can devolve back to tyranny. We can devolve back to a time that would make the antebellum South look like a cakewalk. You want real tyranny? You hand America to authoritarians when America is the biggest military power in the world. You see what tyranny looks like. It will make Hitler look like a child. If there is somebody like Donald Trump who gets into the White House because of disinformation, because of the fact that we are, as a country, still in a rut and can't collectively move forward towards an egalitarian society, the world will watch in horror if our country falls to authoritarian rule. Mark my words. And that is a definite possibility. That threat has not yet passed. And it's sad for me to say that that threat is likely not going to pass for quite some time. Because now we have insurrectionists who are in members of Congress who have committee assignments in intel and judiciary and oversight. These people who are peddling the lies are in power and in positions of oversight. They are in positions with the biggest bullhorns to peddle these lies, to keep on inundating people with lies, factual inaccuracies. People like Tucker Carlson massacring factual record, bringing in facts from several different cases, putting it together, making this monster, this Frankenstein of news, of propaganda, and throwing it out into the masses. Mainstreaming disinformation. We need to call them out. We need to demand that people like Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Alex Jones, Steve Bannon be taken off air. Yeah, they have free speech. They have free speech rights to talk. They just don't have the free speech right to talk on syndicated, on radio airwaves, talk shows, and national television that peddles their lies to millions of people. That is a danger to society. That is an imminent danger to society. And we're watching that unfold. It doesn't get any more imminent than that, you know? You have people lie about the elections, then you have people who lose elections who go out and attack their opponents. Not verbal attacks. Go shoot out their houses. You know, you lie about the elections, then you get people to break into a politician's house and attack her husband with a hammer and break his skull. You lie about the elections, you have American citizens attack law enforcement and then ruin their lives. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Hundreds of police officers injured, several killed, hundreds and hundreds of Americans in jail with a criminal record, their lives ruined. Why? Because Donald Trump wanted to raise money off of his big lie, because Donald Trump wanted to remain in power despite having lost the election, because of one man's power-mongering whims. All of that happened. And the people who were supposed to gather intelligence didn't gather intelligence. So our country is in a precarious position. Our country is in a weak position. The state of our union is not strong today. I hate to say this. The state of our union is vulnerable. The state of our union is questioning. We need to answer those questions. So, hey, Zoila and Deb, thank you for being here. If you're new, please like and subscribe. I'll go back to doing the January 6th report excerpts again on I think tomorrow, maybe the day after, because I have to see, I have to get into the mind frame of going back to work as usual, because Like, it's jarring to see those videos. It's jarring to see um, it's jarring to see the ugliness that I learned in history class play out again in real life, you know? And I felt it that it was important for me to come and tell you this. So thank you. Thank you so much for listening, Deb, Zoila, and I will see you guys again soon.